there. Welcome to the Ebon Hawk Podcast, your source for Star Wars news and all things Knights of the Old Republic. Spoiler alert for the Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films, TV shows, and all other media. This is where the fun begins. Welcome to the Ebon Hawk. We're glad to have you. Could you introduce yourself and what you do?
Segoza Oguego, Ali Huni Yungyats. My name is Huni David. I am of the Akwesasne Mohawk Nation. I was raised in Akwesasne and I'm a big ol' nerdy artist, big ol' native nerd over here. I've been drawing since grade school. Started off with dragons and dinosaurs and that, as we all do. It is the way. I work now as a freelance artist as well, and my social media is Hunid, as some like to call it.
What draws you to Star Wars, or what are some of your favorite subjects?
A lot of it is nostalgia. A lot of it is the storytelling, and I always really loved the stories between the cracks. I grew up with the myths and legends of our people, but I always really loved thinking about the stories in between, like the clone troopers, different warriors within our legends and that. And, you know, there's always an end point to those stories, but I was always curious how far they could have gone or where they had gone after that. So what draws me to Star Wars, I guess, is the soldiers, the clone troopers, those smaller stories like that. And, you know, you grow up with the prequels, you learn to appreciate characters in the background for sure. So yeah. The imagery, the smaller people that don't have, you know, mystical abilities to lift starships and that, I always loved the everyday Joe within the universe. Just the guy in the background trying to get a coffee while, you know, Anakin's crashing a starship into the middle of the road.
Yeah, when does he not crash anything?
Oh, but,
yeah, you're probably one of the most prolific illustrators of the clones I've seen in the Star Wars community. How would you describe your style?
I always really loved comic books. There's a lot of different stuff that's mixed in between. I really love ink work, so I've taken to making my ink work a lot stronger digitally. Whenever I was like leaving college and that, I started to actually work a little bit more digitally. And since then, I've switched completely over to using like my Wacom tablet and Photoshop and that. But I basically do the same thing I would do if I did it traditionally, where I'd start with my ink work, and I always like to study like Frank Frazetta, Frank Miller, you know, Stan Lee, his stories, obviously, and Jack Kirby and that. So a lot of my obsession was over ink work, and then the color in that came a little bit after. I always really loved having like muted tones. I didn't like images and that were like a little bit too loud, if that makes sense. I guess I could say it's like a graphic novel type approach with a little bit of traditional knowledge mixed in between there, because I still approach it as if it's, you know, a watercolor, because that's what I had worked in the most whenever I was at school. So I'd like work everything digitally, or I'd work everything ink, and then I would scan it, and then I would do my watercolors over top. And that's what most of my senior work was a lot of that.
So many people are Star Wars fans, but you're also like one of the biggest, like, in my opinion, like KOTOR artists out there. What draws you to KOTOR?
A lot of nostalgia as well. Growing up with Star Wars and that, there was different stories and comics and video games I came to a lot later on. I'm Indigenous. I grew up on a reservation, and it took me a while to get any type of video game, any type of console. But we always had movies. So my father always really liked to sit me down and have me watch something just so I would calm down for 20 minutes. You know, I was really rowdy. I ran all over the place. I was always outside. So I went to my uncle's, and my uncle, he lived in a smaller apartment across the river. He was off reservation, and it was kind of a rougher neighborhood, not the greatest area for a little Indig kid to run around in. And he had a game. He knew I liked Star Wars. I had just watched it with my father. I think we watched the original trilogy straight through in like an afternoon. And I just remember being transfixed, and he heard that I had really liked it and was buying getting the toys and pretending I was, a Jedi out in the backyard and, chopping at trees and stuff. And he introduced me to this game. He sat me down and he's like, okay, make a decision. I was like, what? I don't remember what point I was at in the game, but he started asking me what I would say, like reading the options in that. So I really enjoyed it for that. So my earliest exposure was that. So I'd get off the bus and get driven over to his house, and he'd babysit me until like late into the night. And I would just sit there, watch like He-Man and Transformers, and then play KOTOR. And he had the Prima, the source book, the guidebook. So I'd go through whenever he was playing, and I'd read that and look at all the images and stuff. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the storytelling and the imagery. I eventually got an Xbox of my own, probably when I was like 12 or 13. Up until that point, it was all just sticks and dirt for me, and drawing, of course. And I got KOTOR 2, and I really enjoyed it. But I felt like something was missing, which even to like a young kid, I felt like that was an odd stance for me to take. Like it felt incomplete, and then come to find out years and years later, it is an accomplishment of a game. But yeah, there is so much that was, cut out. But they managed to get so much done within that year. And all the imagery, all the characters, they really stuck with me. I really enjoyed the storytelling, the characters, and just how strong they were, and the conviction and the decisions that you could make as the player character. It was really crazy. It was opened my brain, opened my world, I guess.
Yeah, it's a prolific game with an excellent narrative and great world building and excellent characters. Like even with Knights of the Old Republic 2, like it was unfinished, but just like years later, I'm just like, Kreia was probably one of the top 3 best written Star Wars characters of all time. And so, I mean, here, I'm still talking about KOTOR all these years later, and there's a big KOTOR community. So
yeah, I was really happy to find that and to see that, because just within my own like little nerdy community, I would be talking about Star Wars and be like, oh yeah, the clones are cool. And I'm like, yeah, the clones are great. Have you played KOTOR? Do you know what KOTOR is? And then just blank faces. And I don't know, finding a wider community, I guess you could say, the wider community of KOTOR fans online has given me more confidence, I guess, to draw those characters. Because I know I drew Scion, and I drew Revan, and I drew all these people during college, and I went from being like the nerdy guy to like the deep tier nerdy guy, and just like, we don't even know he's speaking the deep magics, he knows the deep lores. I have no idea where this is anymore. What the heck is this? A Starforge. But it was really cool to find that.
Yeah, so we'll be recapping KOTOR, the Kashyyyk section, in a second. But before we do that, I just wanted to take a quick break to thank Lorg and Nicky Dog for supporting us on Patreon as a Padawan Initiate and a Knight of the Old Republic, respectively. And if you're curious about our Patreon, it can be found in our Instagram profile's bio. So our Instagram profile is Ebon Hawk Podcast, and you can find the link to our Patreon in that bio, and also at www.patreon.com/Ebon Hawk Podcast. So diving into KOTOR, like Kashyyyk, when I replayed KOTOR as an adult for this podcast, I really began to realize like how much went over my head as a kid with all the layers in the writing, like looking at even just Terrace, like they really hit the classicism, racism, and plagues. And then Kashyyyk, for me as like a white person, I still like saw the issues of colonialism, slavery, police brutality, and deforestation. And because I'd seen your profile and I've loved your art, but you also talk about the Indigenous experience on your profile, I've learned a lot. And when I was playing KOTOR, when you first land, they talk about how the Wookiees call this planet Kashyyyk, but we call, like, Zerka Corporation calls it this number or Edian. It was renamed by
G5623 Edian. What a fancy name.
Yeah, when I was playing it, I was like, oh, that reminds me of something you posted about, like, how, I forget who it was, but an explorer renamed a lot of Canada, and he was just kind of like cruising by, and a lot of those names are still used, but you said in your post, like, these places already had names, and I was like, oh, like, Hooney would be excellent to have on to kind of discuss these things. So
yeah, I think that would be James Cook, or the French came through and renamed some things. But yeah, it's what we call cultural erosion, or relabeling things. You look at the Zerka Corporation itself, and they have a lot to profit from this planet. They have the slaves, really, of the Wookiees and these natural resources, and that's a classic part of Manifest Destiny, of the colonial narrative, which Indigenous people, myself included, have been railing against for generations, really. In grade school, we covered Indigenous history in an afternoon, which speaks to how the American education system handles Indigenous people. We went from the Trail of Tears, talking about, oh, that was pretty sad, that was bad, and then the Indigenous people were gone. And then we jumped straight into the industrial era and talked about the trains. And then there was no more conversation about Indigenous people or Indigenous culture or their struggles, or the fact that we're not one conglomerate. There is over 500 nations just in, like, the US and Canada. And they'd like to be, globbed into one thing, one image, mostly headdresses and that, and teepees. But we're as varied as any other collective of, nations. We're as varied through our language, our culture, our beliefs. There's a lot of common truths between any people you'll find, connection to the land, to the spiritual world, to, one another. And Haudenosaunee people, we have a great law of peace, and that's our first point of preference whenever we come into contact with a new people, with a new culture. There's a lot that goes into that, but yeah, renaming is one of the first steps, and then second is dehumanizing the people. And yeah, it's interesting that Star Wars is such a vehicle for conversations like this and topics like this that you'd never think from the outside looking in, that there's these deeper meanings and these deeper connections to real world and, like, the real history that have gone into, founding these places, to taking these resources, to the subjugation of these people. And yeah, these are, big walking carpets, but the story and everything, the truths behind it are concrete. These are things that have happened and continue to happen.
For those who are unaware, Kashyyyk is the home planet of the Wookiees, and in Knights of the Old Republic, you have a Wookiee companion. His name is Zalabar, and he has some unresolved issues here on Kashyyyk. He was living on Terrace, but he is accompanying Revan and the Ebon Hawk crew on their quest for the Starforge. Zalabar has to deal with some issues back at home, but I was struck how much I'd forgotten, or maybe I just didn't pay attention as a kid, but you go to the Zerka store and there's literally an unconscious Wookiee in a cage.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that Zerka is really definitely exploiting the environment of Kashyyyk, which happens all over the world, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're definitely seeing that in the present day, like, we're gonna like be like, oh wait, that was bad and we shouldn't have done it, maybe realizing that too late.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, the approach that Zerka takes, I think you encounter a guard just before you head into the Shadowlands, and I've taken down the quote here. You ask this guard as the player character what their thoughts are on the Wookiees, and they say they're big, difficult, and worth more caged and shipped off this rock. And that goes right back into what I was saying before. They're dehumanizing these sentient creatures, ignoring that they have a culture, that they have communication, they have, they are a nation, and they're just being exploited and used. And the narrative around them is that, oh, they're big and dangerous, therefore, they're the chaff that needs to be cut. They're the weeds that needs to be cut from this world. And oh boy, that is a common thing whenever it comes to clearing territory and lands from Indigenous people. That is a very, very common thought and a common story. You look at the Apache, you look at the Comanche, you look at the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk. Our people were considered to be big and strong and powerful, and that goes into there's three main points of representation whenever it comes to Indigenous people in media, those being the savage Indian, the mystical Indian, and the brave. I'm forgetting the third, but I think Big Z is the main one that we encounter that's like helping the protagonist, helping along. You could think of like Sacagawea as that archetype. I mean, she was a old person, but within media, within the narrative, that's been claimed as like, oh yeah, these are the good ones that we can trust. Not saying that Big Z is just one of those, but it's a way to dehumanize, label, and then subjugate. It's tried and true, sadly, within the real world.
There are some Zerka employees who like don't even understand Shriwook, which is the Wookiees language, and they're like, oh, they can just learn basic, it's fine, like I don't need to know it,
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of mirrors real history and present day.
The ignoring of the Indigenous language is definitely a common thing. It's seen as devilry. I think if we go back to religious scripture, and that was another approach that was taken to dehumanizing and removing Indigenous peoples from their lands. It was seen as satanic. It was seen as pagan. It was thrown, all these labels are thrown on it because, we don't understand it. We're not going to learn it. And it's the language of, these savage peoples. It's primitive as the person that you greet on the way in, talking about Kashyyyk itself. The name itself, it's savage language, so we're just going to ignore it. We're giving them language, we're giving them our culture. They should be grateful. In my own experience, I had a teacher that failed me in art class, funny enough, for speaking my language. There was only 3 or 4 of us within that class because we were in a predominantly white school system, just because it looked better on paper for getting college applications. And we didn't have the biggest grasp on our language. We didn't grow up with it within the household, so there were stronger speakers within the school. And we had Mohawk class. There was a teacher from within the community that came in and taught us, and it felt like a safe space for Indigenous students at that school. And myself and another friend of mine were some of the strongest speakers within our grade. And this teacher came up to us and slammed a pen on the desk and told us to stop speaking that gibberish. I don't remember the exact quote that she threw at us, but that was the tone, that was the vibe. And her rationale was, well, I don't understand what you're saying, therefore you can't speak it in class. And we were literally 13, however old, and she was afraid of us speaking our language, speaking to each other. And realistically, the conversation was as casual and harmless as it could be. We were just learning how to greet each other and ask each other about our day. And there was no double-handed nature to it. And yet, because she felt threatened by it, she told us to stop and approached it in such a hostile way. And I don't need to get all the way into it, but in the end, the school board that held that up, it was revealed a good portion of them were local white supremacists and KKK members, and they expunged the Mohawk language from the school. They fired the teacher and said that Mohawk wouldn't be spoken at that school because it's not mandatory for the student body. But it was nice to have it while it was there. I've never fully recovered the language, but I'm working on that. I'd like to be fluent one day, but it is a process, and if you don't grow up with it within your household, it is incredibly difficult to pick up later in life. But yeah, so that speaks to me a lot. The repression of the language within this narrative. It's also a big truth and a big obstacle that Indigenous people face, for sure.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And
no worries.
If anyone fails anyone for art, like,
she also just didn't
obviously
like me.
Yeah. She should not have failed you for art. So
yeah, it was pretty biased because I don't know, I stayed after school pretty often to work on my projects because I loved doing the art, but like looking at the pile of pieces that I had made, you couldn't say, well, this is a student that isn't paying attention, he's not applying himself. It was a bias. She was racist. She didn't like any of the Native kids within the class. I won't drop any names, but yeah, it was fun.
Speaking of languages, Zalbar has a family. His father is Freyr. Zalbar's brother is Churndar. And you kind of get the vibe that Churndar is not a good Wookiee. I was going to say not a good dude, but I'm like, he's a Wookiee. So, and Churndar is forcing his subjects to learn basic. Zalbar gets taken hostage until a situation is taken care of in the Shadowlands. And so the player character, Revan, is quested to investigate the Shadowlands, and the vibe I get is that it's a sacred area to the Wookiees. Is that what you kind of got out of it?
Yeah, for sure. We hear a lot about the Shadowlands in other media and that it is such a dangerous area, and I feel like maybe that's something to do with the creatures that they hunt in that area, because I know that there's territorial land that is held sacred to many people and is respected. Just where I work, the Thousand Islands area was a shared territory between the Algonquin people and the Mohawk and the Haudenosaunee. It was respected as an area that was so abundant in game. You know, they came, they got what they needed, and you know, they broke bread, they shared stories, and like I had mentioned, that was the first point of contact for our people. It was a powerful area, respected area. It was a sacred area. And I'm curious if that's kind of how the Shadowlands are seen as well for the Wookiees, because it's, I'm sure it's bountiful. I'm sure they need to get what they get and climb up those roshir trees, I think they're called. Get all the way back to their village and like, oh, look what I got. I got this week's dinner.
Because I think the star map, it's a dark-sided kind of machine, and I think it kind of makes the animals there, like the wildlife, like the Katarns, kind of more aggressive, but I do get the sense that Wookiees are deeply connected to the Shadowlands and that it means a lot to them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I'm curious if the Tatch, is there any significance to them? Like, is there a reason that they're so bountiful? Like, they're just everywhere in that area. And is it bad meat?
I'm not sure, but I do know in Jedi Fallen Order, there's also tax in that game. So I'm like, okay, well, you know, another reason that KOTOR is canon. You know, I'm
Yeah.
not reaching or anything, but it's canon.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
I remember playing that mission and running through the trees, and I was having a great time, and then I saw the tatch and I heard the noise, and I just had flashbacks. And then I saw a meme that I really enjoyed that said, "Here I go killing again."
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
but
Maybe
anyway.
tax kind of represent like just general wildlife you can find in
Yeah.
natural areas, the rainforest, but
True.
they make
There's-
a whole lot of noise. My
Oh
goodness.
yeah,
Ugh.
a whole lot of looped noise. One of the Zerka guards actually mentions that the Wookiee hunters are usually keep the numbers down in the area. I'm sure that's because they're hunting and that's their territory. But they're now leaving areas infested, hoping that Zerka boys will get killed by the local wildlife. Which I'm curious
Yeah.
how much of the tatch in that area are literally just left to annoy Zerka
Yeah.
employees walking the grounds.
That would be funny.
That's my
Yeah.
headcanon.
Zerka employees are pretty complicit in a lot of things.
Oh
And
yeah.
before you come across a bounty hunter from Terrace, Calo Nord, you see Zerka employees ganging up on a Wookiee, and I just kind of read it as police brutality, you know,
Yeah.
the abuse of power.
That is a really, really touchy subject these days.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at
You-
BLM, just look at, you know, we don't have to get all the way into it, but it really is goes along with that narrative of dehumanizing the one that's subjugated. He's, you know, just seen as wild, he's seen as savage, I'm sure, and that goes into justifying their actions. It goes into justifying a lot of actions taken by law enforcement towards certain groups of people. Sorry.
It came out in 2003, you know, so
Yeah.
it's interesting to see what from history kind of just keeps on repeating. And I don't know, it trying to fix patterns, like I'm like, oh, there's a lot of work to be done, and I just hope that it does get done. And
Yeah.
it's sad.
Yeah, it's gonna take some time because those are some pretty well walked routes. It is a very deep and complicated subject, but yeah, there is so much bias towards certain people, and it's really harsh and really sad to see. Ironically, most of these people are protesting peacefully.
Yeah. When I played the game, we kind of were like looking at how to adapt, you know, KOTOR cinematically, and in my mind I see the first movie as Terrace, Dantooine, and then Kashyyyk.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go to Kashyyyk, you fight Calo Nord there. I believe his canonical death happened elsewhere, but
Yeah, I was curious about that. In my review, I saw that he's notoriously hard to kill, but he meets an end on Kashyyyk, but also I think his canonical end is on Tatooine, correct?
yep. But then you come across Jolie Bindo, who is a legendary KOTOR character, probably in most people's top 3 characters from the game. And
Yeah.
he is voiced by the great Kevin Michael Richardson, who also goes on to voice Jace Malcolm in SWTOR and so many other games and shows, really, but a great voice.
Yeah. Yeah, he is in a lot. He has had a huge career.
If KOTOR were to be adapted, were there any actors you would like to see in that role?
I think the most popular pick I see is Keith David, and we had talked about it before, and yeah, I think he would be a really great pick because he has such a gravitas to his voice, but I feel like he could really portray that tired old man that's seen it all. And I think one of his lines is that he's seen both extremes of the light and the dark, and both annoy him.
Yeah.
I think it's he's such a classic character. And I took a very professional note earlier in my research. Is Jolie Bindo the most relatable Jedi there is?
I think he's definitely a great one. It would be interesting to see how him being a gray Jedi would be adapted, but I think you could do a lot with him. I mean, Ahsoka's technically not a Jedi in her later years, but she's still basically a Jedi. So
me and my girlfriend talk about that a lot. Like the fact that she is not a Jedi, but she is the most Jedi non-Jedi there is, and I feel like that applies a lot as well to Jolee.
Yeah. Did you get the vibe that Jolee knew who Revan was the whole time?
I haven't played it in a little bit, but I don't think if he knew, I don't think he cared. I think he was just along for the ride to see how things played out. Because I know at his heart, at his center, he is of the light, but I'm curious how much of that was like, well, if I can help out or lend a hand or, maybe steer him in the right direction, I can.
Yeah, I mean, I got the vibe that Jolee knew, but he's not gonna just be like, hey, you're Revan. I think he was just kind of waiting to see how things played out and kind of just follow the will of the Force, kind of like Qui-Gon Jinn. Yeah, but
just goes with the flow. I'm curious, he must have, along that line, he must have recognized Revan as well, right, from the Academy days, unless he left before he had risen.
I think he left, but I think the way he kind of was able to sense it was either through the Force or like when they come across the star map, and it's kind of like, here's some really not subtle foreshadowing that you're Revan, but it was kind of funny. But
he really should have given a lot of side eye to him whenever he came to the star map, right? And it just unlocked.
Yeah. That's one thing that I'm like, in a movie, would that be too much? Like, I'm like, it's just something to think about. But Jolee does mention that the Jedi aren't really helping the Wookiees. They're kind of more concerned about the star map. And I mean, I think that's just one example you can kind of see, like, Jolee is kind of more aligned with, I would say, good than the Jedi Council on Dantooine, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, the Jedi Council on Dantooine, they send you to solve problems that are maybe like a couple hundred yards from the temple itself. So I'm sure they're, kind of blasé about the plight of the Wookiees.
A lot of things kind of happen in the Kashyyyk section. You kind of find Freyr, you kill a great beast. You also find the star map, and like there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of foreshadowing going on. I kind of think, like, in an adaptation, I would want Zalbar to kind of have more agency and, like, kind of, like, be more part of the story. I don't know. Like, it's hard when Wookiees don't really communicate the way that people are kind of used to hearing. I don't know if there would be subtitles or something, but I think it can be done.
I definitely agree with you. I think it would be really interesting if we follow the player character until after he leaves the ship, and then maybe we could jump back to Big Z looking out of the Ebon Hawk's windows and seeing the Rocher trees, and maybe he steps out and he can, he smells the air in that, and maybe he gets a good like chest full of the air, and maybe we get some flashbacks. We don't have a lot of those in Star Wars itself, but I feel like a lot of that could be achieved through visual storytelling. Maybe whenever he comes back to the village, whenever he's brought in to see his brother Chundar, maybe there's some memories within that hut. Maybe there's some memories within their domicile, or just looking out the window and you could see ghosts, or like his memories playing out of them as children. Chundar as the runt in that. Maybe we could get little hints and pieces of that backstory to why Chundar is such a jerk now, that he was overlooked by their father Freyr, and maybe Big Z was the star quarterback of sorts, and he was just in his shadow, Loki and Thor type of relationship. And now that he's in power, it's just all Chundar, it's all Loki. I think that would be the best way to approach it. in my opinion. Just a lot of visual storytelling, because we don't want 20 minutes of Wookiee growling and Shrirook. Not to say that it's not a beautiful language on its own, but you know, we've all seen, or some of us have seen, the holiday special and know how that goes.
Because, I mean, when you're telling a story in a movie, I remember talking to someone and I was like, The Rise of Skywalker just starts and you see Kylo Ren like just kind of killing some people, and then it's like later I had to figure out like, oh, those were Vader cultists, they were bad people. It was probably a good thing that Kylo was just killing them. And I was like, why couldn't they just like, I don't know, kind of give more context in the movie so it's not just like random stuff is happening and you talk to some people and they're like, but then they would have to take 15 minutes to explain it. And I was like, no, you just like, with framing, like color symbolism and like the score, you can get a lot across like to an audience, like maybe just in 15 seconds, you know, like, because replaying this game, I was like, the Kashyyyk section, I was like, this is a whole lot of me reading subtitles and it's kind of taking a long time, and I'm always just kind of thinking about how could this be adapted, and I was like, this is actually a pretty compelling story, and I think like you can just streamline it so it's kind of down to like kind of more simplified causes and effects, but I think everyone can get behind it, you know? Yeah. And it's Wookiees reclaiming their homeland like from an oppressor, and I think everyone can get behind that, you know? And it can be told simply, and Zalbar can be more part of the story. I think maybe he could even go down with Revan and like be like, we need to do this, like I need to help my people become free of Zerka and my brother, you know? It
goes back to that classic Elijah Wood thing, right? Where like, well, how could we know that? I'm forgetting the tweet offhand now, but yeah, there's a lot of storytelling that you could achieve visually. I think just having Big Z casually walk around the village itself with maybe Chundar's escort, or maybe with Chundar himself. But yeah, there's a lot of story present. There's a lot of story there, and there's a lot of story that could be told once Zalbar returns. There's a lot of if-onlys that I have approaching this bit of the story, where I really wish that we could see like the Wookiee art. What is the art on Kashyyyk look like? Are these bins and these wicker baskets around, are they more decorative or are they more, utilitarian? Because within Haudenosaunee culture, there's a lot of utility to the items that we use, but we always personalize them in some type of way. There was some kind of embroidery work, or markings, or art adorning them. There's a lot of symbology, a lot of visual language that could be put across on these items, and I think that would be really cool. I mean, we see a lot more of that in Revenge of the Sith, just in the background of like the Wookiees with their armor in that, and these aren't a wholly primitive people. The Sword of Baka, it's mentioned it's an older blade, correct? Like, so they've had this for a good while. It's not like they're just being introduced to sword and steel. Like they are an advanced culture, but they're seen and labeled as savages. I don't know, I wish we could have seen more of that, like the artwork, the maybe the music. I don't know what Shrirook chorus would sound like, but I'm down to see it.
Yeah, I mean, what makes Star Wars great is the world building. Yeah. I mean, like, Kashyyyk was only like on screen, I want to say, for like 5 minutes in Revenge of the Sith. But it made a pretty good impression. I was like, it would be really cool to see like 4,000 years previously, and spending more time there, you could get more of a sense of the Wookiees' culture. Yeah. And what you're saying, like what they build, what they consider beautiful, what their art is. Yeah. And just kind of like replaying this, I'm like, it gets me excited and I want to see more, because I think this section of the story touches on like so many issues that are important to so many people, and kind of I feel like people are more aware of them than ever before, and it would just be interesting to see like what kind of dialogue could come out of it, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think a lot of good can, maybe this is me being a naive person, but I think like fiction can help break down some of the walls that are in society. It can increase empathy and just kind of create more realization and connections, but I don't know. Like, that's just me thinking.
Yeah, I definitely fully agree with that. Sci-fi itself is a great vehicle for explaining those larger concepts of like, racism, colonialism, these types of things. Like, they can all be approached in sci-fi and these stories told and made, a little bit more digestible for the general population. It's been used as a vehicle for these conversations for so long, and suffice to say, sci-fi is definitely my favorite genre of media out there right now.
I'm always team light side here at the Ebon Hawk podcast, but Revan is able to figure out the star map, and Zalbar makes his choice to side with his father against his misled brother, and the Wookiees rise up against Zerka and Zalbar. It's foreshadowed like he's going to be chief one day. Baka's blade has been entrusted to him, I guess.
I think just going back to, maybe we cut to Big Z's perspective. He's walking around the village. He's seeing these, phantoms of the past. Ooh, that's a cool phrase. Anyway, a little pat on the back there. He's seeing these little images and these memories playing out. And maybe as he's going, he can see, we don't fully understand, obviously off the bat, but, his friends from childhood. I was thinking about it watching clips last night. Chundar's, like, closest guard, his like most loyal Wookiees, what are they getting out of this situation? Are they just serving, the writ of their people, serving the chieftain of the time, the new the leader, just because he's their leader, or are they benefiting in some way as well? Like Big Z mentions, there are people that would rise up. There will continue to be Wookiees that will rise up against him, and I wish we had gotten like a little bit of a hint towards that. Which ones of these Wookiees had doubts with their leader, had doubts knowing that Chundar was benefiting and was breaking bread with their oppressor, with Zerka. Not only broke bread, but had them within his court, had them guarding his body, and he continuously threatens the player and Zalbar that none of these Wookiees would dare betray him. And Big Z, has his counter to that, saying that no, there's Wookiees that are gonna oppose you. And I wish we had seen a little bit more of a Wookiee uprising in that way. Maybe Big Z in these littler ways, finding out which ones he could trust. Maybe in looks, maybe in like signals, or I'm not sure. But it would be a lot of visual storytelling, because we couldn't have 20 solid minutes of growling at one another, and just a lot of eye acting, which that is a big role for anybody within a Wookiee costume.
I think actors and storytellers could have a lot of fun with this kind of section. Like, it doesn't have to be like just like you say, like 20 minutes of growling. Like, you can handle so much with this, and I'm like, ooh, this is a fun writing opportunity, and like my mind is just going in a few different directions, and I'm like, ooh, this is exciting.
There's a lot of stories to be told with the Wookiee people, and I'm here for all of it. I don't know, I did enjoy the holiday special for that aspect, and seeing them in more of a modern home and setting, and the stir whip stir that was a good time. But there's a lot of storytelling that you can achieve just through looks and eye acting. Peter Mayhew did such a good job within that role to give off such a warm and welcoming vibe. What does that look like whenever you have Wookiees scheming, just visually, just having conversations without growling, without muttering a word to one another. Like, can I trust you? I trust you. Or, no, I'm with Chundar. Like, those conversations, those little looks and things. It'd be really great to see.
Are you ready for this question from Astrodroid?
Oh, yeah. I'm 100%
All right.
down.
So one of our patrons, Astrodroid, asked, Kashyyyk has a long history of being occupied. Zerka, Trade Federation, and Empire. Due to the natural resources, slavery, and the strategical location, is Kashyyyk always going to be seen as a prize to be won in the galaxy? During the Clone Wars, the Wookiees are fighting alongside the Jedi and the Republic Army. Then when Order 66 happens, the Galactic Empire is established, and the Clone Army instantly goes from being allies to oppressors. Like, what does that question kind of like make you think?
It makes me think of every broken treaty between a governmental body and Indigenous people. You can make grandiose stands and alliances, but in the end, there's always some kind of trade-off between the aggressor and the oppressed. There's always something hidden within that contract, or some resource or some way that they're actually trying to scheme. And it doesn't matter. You've signed this thing, and it's going to be torn. It's going to be ignored whenever they find something valuable within that territory, within that land, or of those people, really, which is another truth within our space opera that is still prevalent today, really. And you see the Imperials try to rename Kashyyyk as well. I think it was Imperial District such and such. They tried to wipe it off the map as well, just to avoid. Well, we're doing what Zerka did. We're doing what generations past have did, and we're exploiting the people themselves for our gain, our Death Star, our needs.
It is interesting how Kashyyyk, I don't know if it was intentional or like when A New Hope was established or when the holiday special was established, but I'm just becoming like more aware. I'm like, oh man, there are so many parallels like for Indigenous populations all over the world with Kashyyyk. Then I was like, is that was that how it was envisioned, or did that just kind of come about with the storytelling? But I mean, even just thinking of the Force Unleashed, there's a level that happens. Yeah. There's a few levels that happen on Kashyyyk, and you kind of see how the Wookiees there, they were on the Republic's side, and that fighting off the Trade Federation, and then the Empire was enslaving Wookiees to work on the Death Star and kind of build it for them.
Yeah. And I think that goes into, you chose what seemed like the right ally at the time, but you didn't know that they had, a grand scheme and a grand plan and false intentions for this alliance. It's sad because, the Republic and the Wookiees had such a great fighting chance against the Separatists at the end of the war there, and such a partnership with them taking out the Trandoshans, those slavers as well, because there's always that conflict between those two. And we see so much more representation of the Wookiee people and their culture in that. And we get our introduction to the Raik blade, which I also, to step back a little bit again, I wish that the sword of Baka was a little bit more curved, a little bit more in line with that Wookiee design. It looks so cool.
I don't know. In my mind, I have to believe that after KOTOR, after Zerka is fought back, that there was some peace before, like, the Trade Federation and the Clone Wars. But I guess there are patterns in history, but I guess that means that people can always choose to align with good and to listen to each other and to be better, but
yeah. And that trauma of the past, I'm sure there's, I'm not sure offhand how long the Wookiees live, but there's generations and generations. We have generational trauma within our Haudenosaunee people of the residential schools, of that type of genocide, extermination against our people, and that affects us to this day. And I'd really hope in my mind that, with the light side ending, that you get that Big Z maybe has an understanding, or maybe Freyr just knew that Z was going to outlive Revan in one way or another, and just knew that eventually Big Z would be coming back to claim that blade, to claim his throne, to protect his people against Zerka. And I'd really love to think that Big Z grew old with, Mission as their spokesperson, grew old and passed on his planet, and maybe got, whatever ceremony goes along with that, to defend his people, to maintain that peace and to protect the generations going forward. Because within, again, Haudenosaunee culture, we're always considering the seventh generation, not just ours, not just our children or our children's children. We're thinking far ahead to the seventh generation to ensure that they have, a better life and expectancy and the same types of things we enjoy here today on this earth, with the environment and with the waters being clean, and we fight for that. And I hope Big Z, had like a similar idea. It'd be really great if we could go back to Kashyyyk and see maybe like a monument to Big Z, the chieftain, the noble chieftain, the wise, truly the wise, because Chundar claimed that title and claimed those accolades falsely.
But I think Zalbar, because of the journeys he goes on, would be an excellent leader, and he overcame a lot of troubles, and I don't know, I think he would be an excellent leader.
For sure. Yeah. He's well traveled, well learned, and at his core he's a good person, he's a good sentient, he's a good leader. And again, in Haudenosaunee culture, we elect our leaders, we choose our leaders, they're monitored, they're kept in mind from childhood. Our faith keepers, they have their eye on children within the community that could be chiefs, but we ensure that they have a family of their own before they take on any type of leadership role, to ensure that they know what it's like to be fearful, to want to protect something that's yours, something so close to you. And the nation, the people, the culture are seen as that. Because if you're in the lead and you have this power without a center, like a solid concrete center, then that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah, that's very wise. What would you say you hope people take away from the Kashyyyk section of KOTOR, or anything else you want listeners to take away?
Just that the Wookiees should be free, that they should be free to govern themselves, to elect their own path forward, and the planet should be given back to Big Z. And we know that Zerka, I don't know if this is a spoilery thing for the podcast, but is Loki Sith. So I hope that there would be an alliance, recognition of their statehood, of their nationhood, of their being a people, rather than being, big walking carpets that are difficult to manage and great as slaves. I hope that they can be recognized as a government, as a nation of their own, and treated as such, as we hope for any Indigenous people. That's the first point of contact. Not what can we gain from this relationship, but what can we gain from this friendship, this trade-off of meeting of minds and stories and history. For my review, I watched the Star Wars KOTOR movie saga, or movie trilogy on YouTube, and I really enjoyed that interpretation of the ending, because we get, a little dance sequence, and we see Big Z getting down, dancing with a female Wookiee. You know, maybe maybe that's his future wife whenever he returns, a childhood friend. But I really enjoyed that. Just shout out to that creator. That content was really great and gave me a really good chuckle last night.
Kevin Smets, he does great work with the KOTOR movie saga, and he was a great guest for our 50th episode, and we hope he's doing well and making a great recovery.
Yeah.
So hashtag smash cancer.
All the way.
Where can our listeners find you?
I guess Hooney D on Instagram, HONNID. It's pronounced Hooney David, as in D for David. So it's like, who am I looking at? And your knee, the thing connecting your leg to the rest of your leg. So yeah, that's where folks can find me. I'm working on a lot of stuff in my own professional life on the side, but I do take commissions. But you know, each one of these pieces takes me 6 hours plus, which was a thing that we did in college and university. So that's an approach I've taken to each one of these drawings. Even if it's just a little blue elephant man singing his heart out, I approach them with that type of structure in mind, as well as my KOTOR pieces. But yep, that's my main front. I have an in-print page if anybody's looking for prints. And yeah, I just set up my website recently as well. So those are the 3 spots you can find me. And all that information is in my bio on my Instagram page.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, and may the force be with you.
You can find the Ebon Hawk Podcast on Instagram at Ebon Hawk Podcast. The Ebon Hawk Podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as everywhere else that Anchor Podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out immensely. Our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Sherman at alistair.wixsite.com/Alistair Sounds. Our transition music was composed by Christian Walker at christianwalkermusic.com. This has been the Ebon Hawk Podcast. May the force be with you. We will be back soon. Bye for now.